Welcome to Becoming Untriggered, a podcast brought to you by psychodynamic coaches and parents of three, Lavinia Brown and Andrew Lynn.
Together we normalise and unpack common challenges faced by couples and parents, explore how these could be symptoms of unprocessed trauma, and support you with the tried and tested tools for you to show up as the mum or dad, partner, and person you deserve to be. Welcome to Becoming Untriggered. Today we're talking about in-laws and how in-laws can be a source of friction, tension, triggers, and where those triggers originate. And it's not always in your parents-in-law. So we're going to explore that and find out what the most common triggers are with parents-in-law and where they might originate. So let's start with the most common trigger for my clients, the mums, and that is parenting approach. This is a really big thing. Many of our generation want to be, as we discussed in last episode, gentle parents, conscious parents, respectful parents, and that's not necessarily something that our parents' generation were up for or were even aware of. So there can be tension when the grandparents come round and maybe babysit on their own, maybe babysit whilst the parents are still around. And you get to witness or hear from your children that they do not share the same approach. Perhaps they're more authoritarian, perhaps they're more disciplinarian, maybe they use physical, I want to say violence, but it is violence, isn't it? Maybe they're more physical in the way that they discipline your children. Maybe they don't believe in the routine that you've set up. Maybe they do want a routine when you are totally against a routine. So that can be difficult because it's not a normal relationship. It's not a friend. It's not your own parents who you may or may not be comfortable being yourself with. It's someone that you're kind of still tiptoeing around because they're not as close as your parents, but they're way closer and they're way more in your life. And perhaps you're more reliant on them for childcare than you'd like to be. So it's difficult to set boundaries. It can be really hard to set boundaries with parents and try and get them to parent in the same way as you without offending them, which could cause its own problems.
Yeah, I think, like we said earlier, I don't think this is maybe as significant for men as it is for women. Generally because I think women tend to be in control of the parenting style, maybe a bit more than men. So it's not necessarily a conflict. Certainly from my point of view, I was happy to kind of let our children go into whatever environment they were going into. So whether that was your parents' environment or my parents' environment, and happy for them to have a different experience than they were having at home with us. So that necessarily wasn't a trigger for me in terms of different parenting styles. I can't remember that being an issue. And luckily your parents, even though they had obviously challenges as parents, they were decent grandparents.
They were, yeah.
And they were loving and it was safe there, and the children got treated a lot and they went out for meals, and the children generally had a good time.
Actually, that's a massive point. Treating, inverted commas, bloody sugar and screen time. That's a massive trigger for so many mums. The grandparents want to, inverted commas, treat the children, and that takes the form of sugar. And that's not okay. Same with screen time. It can be very difficult to say, I don't want my child eating chocolate when they're 6 months old or watching a 2-hour movie when they're 1. It's just not okay. But how do you say that without ruining not only the relationship with them, but also ruining the relationship with your partner? Because your partner ends up being the go-between. And I've had that be sources of friction within a relationship because the woman said to the husband, you tell your mum because it's easier for you. You say we don't do this. Or another massive one, being given plastic, tacky shit for birthdays or Christmas and wanting to say, I don't want this. We've had all of this, actually. I remember this very vividly. And the woman having to say to the man, can you tell them? Because they don't have the courage to stand up for themselves because they're scared of being judged or making the relationship with the partner even worse, saying, I don't like your mum, or I don't like the way she grandparents, we don't share the same values. And obviously you've been brought up by them. So it adds another source of tension to the relationship between the mother and father.
I definitely remember that creating tension with us. And I think it's very complicated. If I think back to that time, part of me is like, I don't want to manage my parents or my sisters, or I don't want to manage anyone. They can buy what they want. They can give the kids the experience what they want. They can treat them if they want to treat them. And I don't want to micromanage my parents, but maybe there's a bit of fear in there as well. And maybe there's a bit of not wanting to rock the boat. And again, I think it really depends on how passionate you are about those things in your kid's life. If you want your kids to never have any sugar, if you want them to never have any screen time, if you don't want them to receive a load of cheap gifts, if that's really important to you, then there's an opportunity to put boundaries down there and maybe speak your truth if that is important.
But it is really important. It is really important to many of my clients. And the husbands often end up not respecting this either. When daddy's on duty, daddy doesn't give vegetables, or daddy gives 3 puddings, or daddy lets them watch more screen time. It is a massive issue. It's really hard to get other people on the same parenting page. And actually, I think it's actually impossible. That's what I say to my mum clients. You're not necessarily going to win this battle. You can say how important this is to you, and you can have non-negotiable parenting things, and you can have negotiable ones. I actually get them to write out a list. What is it that you feel so passionately about that it's a non-negotiable, and what are you willing to compromise on? And usually when my clients do that and they discuss it with their partners, the partner's like, okay, I get that this is really, really important. There's only 2 things on that list. I can work with that. And, there's the odd not working with it, which you can let go. But parents-in-law, you can't have that conversation with them. And actually, they often feel entitled enough, and this isn't just personal, I'm talking about clients here. They feel entitled enough to be the balance, the counterbalance to your strictness. They might view what you find really important as silly or, far-fetched.
Authoritarian.
No, not authoritarian enough to lax, as in we're talking sugar and screen time here. So they might almost go behind, and I've had this with clients. Their children have gone, Mummy, we had this, or Grandma gave us this, when the mothers actually had the guts to go, we don't do that in our house. Please don't give them this. And the grandma or granddad's gone ahead and done it because they think, oh, poor children. They need this. They need a bit of counterbalance to that strictness. So it feels like there's almost sometimes some inbuilt tension with parents-in-law around almost expecting that you're not going to be on the same page and being 2 extremes and one having to counterbalance the other one, which is really triggering.
Do you think it's because unconsciously they just want to have a niche, the grandparents? So they're like, okay, if there's no point in me being the same as their mum. That's no fun. That's no good. I'm not going to get, there's no role there if I'm just parenting like their mum. So I need to do something different. I need to give them a different experience. So it's special for them. They want to be the special grandparent. Right?
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, it could be a little bit like siblings with various, in the birth order, they will seek attention in different ways, whether that's good or bad, because it doesn't matter to them. Attention is good. So you will never get siblings that have exactly the same traits.
But also, I think when you're a parent, you go through this battle of laying down rules and laying down boundaries. And there's often conflict because it's different to what the children inherently think they want at that point in time. They want sugar and they want screen time. So you go through your journey as a parent, putting boundaries in place, basically saying no all the time. And then when you're a grandparent, I don't want to do that. I don't say no anymore.
I don't think it's about having a niche. I think it's about an easy life.
Yeah.
If they are in charge of the children, and this is one of the problems actually, if you don't have alternative childcare options and your parents-in-law or your parents, but maybe you divide it between the 2, are the people that look after your children, then there's already an unspoken agreement There's an obligation that they are doing what you want them to do, so we'll do it our way. It makes it harder to lay down the same parenting approach if you're already asking them a favor. And I always say to my clients, why are you relying so much on parents-in-law? If you can extricate yourself from that dynamic so that there's no unspoken obligation, and those parents-in-law can then be grandparents and have fun without having to follow your rules or follow the way that you do things, that eases everything immediately. So I think there's also something around parents not wanting to be obligated. Maybe, like you said, they've done that already. They're over it. But also they want easy life. I think they want to hand the kids back and the kids are smiling. They don't want to necessarily have to say no sugar. I disagree that children want sugar. Children don't know what sugar is until they're introduced to it. And my kids weren't introduced to it until your parents brought it in, which was very annoying for me for a long time. So I disagree that children naturally want sugar. They don't. That's a really warped opinion.
They're addicted to sugar.
Yeah, once they've had it. But
they're going to be exposed to it because of the world we live in.
Yes, but surely you want your family to be on your side and to delay that as far as possible. They're going to get it at school. They're going to get it at school. They're going to get it at kids' parties. But I think ideally you don't want them to be exposed to it before, the longest time period possible. And that was something that your parents did before I was happy about it. But anyway, back to the parenting approach and laying boundaries. I think this does relate back to the relationship that you have with your parents and how boundaried you've been with them. If you are someone that is able to lay down boundaries with your parents, that's going to be much easier. If you haven't been and you're inner child, because that's the part of you that's still dependent on them, is still quite strong and in the driving seat of your life, that's going to come across with your parents-in-law as well.
Without a doubt. I think it did for definitely for me. If I think back to my relationship with your parents, like I said, your parents were very good to our kids. They were generous. That it was a very safe environment, but they're also quite judgmental. I found myself like performing when I went around there. So it's like I felt like I couldn't be myself with your parents because I felt like they were judging me. So I felt like I always had to gain their love, gain their acceptance.
But isn't there always an element of performance? You've reminded me that I was always really nervous when I got to your house, when I'm not a particularly nervous person, because you are someone different with your parents. I am someone different with my parents. I think that's the crux of it, that you chose me, I chose you, but we chose each other out of the parental gaze. And when you then spend time with your parents-in-law, it's normal and perhaps inevitable that you are partly going to revert back to your child self. And that child self might be very different to the person that I met or that you met. And then there's tension because you then have to fit in a way that you're not used to because that's not how your partner is outside of their family home.
Yeah, I think you've got a relationship with the in-laws and then you've got a relationship with your partner when the in-laws are around, and that probably changes. And then you've got the relationship with your partner, which also it can get affected by the in-laws when they're around. In our case, that your inner child was triggered often by your mum coming around and doing her thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think the entitlement, and that can come up with parents-in-law, then entitlement to the children. We have a right to see the children when we want, how we want. And that might not be convenient for them to just drop round when they fancy it or spend time with the grandchildren unplanned. I know my dad did that with us quite a bit, but I just want to go back to the performance bit. I definitely used to go back into performance mode with my
parents.
Yeah. And I expected you to do the same, which must have been difficult.
But that was the rules of engagement set by your parents.
Yeah.
Because they weren't unconditionally loving. There was, you had to perform a certain way, you had to act a certain way, you had to have certain manners, you had to bow down to them in some kind of way and respect them in some kind of way to be accepted.
Yeah. And with yours, conversely, you were the golden child. And so I ended up, and this always makes me laugh when I think about it because it is quite funny. I always ended up being the one that put you down unconsciously because everyone was being so ridiculously adoring of you. And I unconsciously had to put a spanner in the works by just talking about things that you'd done that were annoying to me to balance it out and go, wait a minute, this guy's real. This guy isn't a god. Can we cut the fake praise for someone he's not?
How did that go for you in terms of your relationship with my family?
It went really badly. But that's another aspect of this, that parents-in-law will see their children in a different way to their partner. And so the partner can bring in this whole other dynamic that is not wanted. It's not wanted. It's not welcome. I mean, I can talk about your family. I can talk about any family. I can talk about my family. When one of the children comes back to the family home and they've got a partner, often it's difficult to accept that partner because the partner brings a whole new dynamic, which is that child, but it's often a side of that child that you've never seen. So this can happen with siblings, sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law. You're like, oh, can't stand
Everyone
that.
thinks they've changed. Yeah. They've changed our lovely daughter. They've changed our son. And they haven't. You just get the son or the daughter is forced to almost be themselves in front of their parents, maybe even for the first time, because this partner's there.
And that was the issue for us. And I think I got scapegoated a little bit or blamed for how you changed. It's like the attributes that drew you towards me in the first place that were always there, that had perhaps been hidden, they were the ones that I got blamed for. They became my traits that had somehow lured you in and changed you. It is difficult because I think deep down everyone wants to get on with their the grandparents of their kids. Everyone wants their children to have extended family. That's something that comes up as resistance when I say, why are you using your grandparents so much for childcare? And it's usually the mum that says, well, we want our children to have a close relationship with extended family, but it's not always what they want. And this is another point of tension. You are not in control of how your parents or how your parents-in-law want to treat your children, how close they want to be with your children. And sometimes it can be really upsetting for my clients when their parents-in-law have driven 2 hours, 3 hours, or maybe flown across the country to come and see their kids. And they spend way less time than was expected, or maybe they cut their stay short. That's what your parents or grandparents want to do. In the end, that's how they are living their life the way they want to. Maybe they don't want a close relationship with your children. Maybe they want one that's too close for you. Managing that is difficult. And I would say that the trigger there lies with you. Have you got some fantasy idea of what extended family looks like? Big happy Christmases all around the Christmas tree, everyone sharing and laughing. Again, we tried that with your family. We tried that with my family. It doesn't always work out. We all have this fantasy of, maybe we've seen it on TV, of a big happy family with the children running around, but it's lots of different characters and lots of different expectations of children that are usually disappointing that come into the mix. Basically, there's a lot of expectation on what family should look like, and much of it is unrealistic. And I think it's easier to work that out with a partner than it is with extended family. There are too many personalities involved.
Yeah, you're right. There can be a fantasy of, it's going to be easier. Let's get the in-laws over. Let's get the parents over. Let's get together. Let's get some support. Where in actual fact, what you're actually doing is you're putting together people that potentially got a trauma bond and people that potentially not acting authentically. And that's obviously got a lineage through generations, parents, grandparents, parents, and children. But what you're actually doing with family get-togethers is you're crossing that over with somebody else
Yeah.
And their family, for example, with me, I'm dropping into your generational trauma and I'm adding almost a different level of complexity to it. I've got my relationship with you, I've got my relationship with your in-laws, then my children. So it can actually get more complex rather than be easier. So it's important for us as individuals to understand our dynamic, not just with our parents, but with our in-laws, to see whether we are being triggered or we are acting inauthentically, and to explore that relationship, not just the relationship with our parents, but the relationship with our in-laws.
Definitely. It's one step removed from the parents. And often parents-in-law unfairly get wounds projected onto them that they don't originate with them. It's much easier to blame your parents-in-law for something that you haven't yet owned as part of your dynamic with your actual parents. Because many of us feel dependent on our parents still, especially if your inner child's still in the driving seat, then you're going to feel like you need your parents to act in a certain way for you to feel okay. That's how you know your inner child is in charge. If you haven't done that work yet, and you need to, it's the foundation for all secure attachment, then you may project your wound onto your parents-in-law instead. So, for example, I've got clients that said, my mother-in-law never listens. She's so dismissive. She just does her own thing. She's really selfish. It's like, okay, fine. Those are triggers with your mother-in-law. When do you remember feeling these things before? Was your mother like this? Did your mother not listen? Was your mother dismissive? Oh, yeah, right. Okay. So yes, your mother-in-law is triggering you. That's a fact. But the original wounding comes from your mother. It's not from your mother-in-law. And it's easier to blame the mother-in-law because you don't need the mother-in-law. You don't need the mother-in-law to act a certain way for you to feel safe. You need your mother because it's your close family. So that's something to be aware of, that whatever your mother-in-law, father-in-law is triggering in you, it might not be with them. It might be with your parents. So it's always best to start with your childhood and the attachment that you had with your parents.
Yeah, they're often a mirror, just as our partners are a mirror. And because they're obviously linked, their in-laws and our partner, it's likely that there could be similar triggers.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. In the end, you're not necessarily going to be able to change your parents-in-law or anyone else for that matter. And it doesn't always matter how other people treat your children. I think it's really important to bear in mind that your children will meet other people that don't have the same approach as you. Perhaps parents-in-law are the first example that you come across because they're the first people that are exposed to your children, so it's even more triggering. But you may have school teachers, you may have friends that they go and stay with, you may have all sorts of people that they are exposed to that treat them very differently than you would like. The first point of contact is your parents-in-law and your parents, and that's okay. As long as you are parenting in the way that you want to, your children are pretty resilient, actually. They're not going to crumble because one person's treated them differently to how their mother treats them, which isn't as gentle and respectful as you, perhaps. But they're quite resilient and they need to be exposed to different ways of parenting. So it's not the end of the world. What I would say, though, is don't rely exclusively on grandparents for childcare. I don't think it promotes a healthy dynamic. It's one that should really, if you want a good relationship with grandparents, it should be one that's based more on fun, on them being able to be who they want to be, as well as your children, not necessarily them having to follow some routine or approach that they're not familiar with.
Yeah, and I would say it all depends on what happens when the in-laws come into your environment. Your environment, your family is the most important thing. They should add to that environment. It should be safer, it should be better, it should be a positive experience for not only for the children, but for you as a couple. And if it isn't, then you need to get some distance. There's no good in relying on the in-laws or relying on your parents and having them as part of your life if all they do is leave a bomb field behind when they've left for you to clear up afterwards and has a negative effect on your relationship, has a negative effect on your kids. If that's the case, you've got to get some distance so you guys can protect yourself from that. But not only that, heal the wounds that get triggered while they're there. Because with that space that you've got, you can go through your own process, you can heal your inner child, you can release all the baggage that you got from your past. And then come back into that relationship with them with boundaries from a point of presence, from a point of being an adult and not the child. And then you can have a relationship on your terms rather than on their terms.
Yeah, they are triggering. I've just remembered, which is something huge, that when you see your parents in particular, but also parents-in-law with your children, that can stir up memories of ways that you were treated that you had completely forgotten. I definitely had that with my parents, seeing them in action and seeing how disciplinarian they were with my kids. Again, very common with my clients, parents often shut down. They shut down big emotions. They're not okay with holding space for it. That's something that we as parents have had to really work hard on. Most of us have, it's not natural, but seeing our parents in action, if that's triggering because you're like, oh my word, I must have had that done to me. No wonder I'm the way that I am. That's a great thing, actually. Then, yeah, limit the amount of time perhaps that your grandparents are spending with the kids, but do the work. Every trigger, remember, is an opportunity for growth and healing. So don't perpetuate trauma. Don't leave your kids with parents-in-law or parents that are doing the same thing to your children as they were doing to you. That's just reliving what you went through. But take that as an opportunity to heal what it brings up in you, because you may have forgotten all of this, which can be quite difficult because parents change, right? And we can have a good relationship with them as adults and totally forget how difficult it was for us to be a child in that household growing up. So grandparents and parents-in-law are just another kind of reminder of your childhood and what needs to get healed. So in summary, parents-in-law are just really another extension of your childhood. They are figures of authority that are closer to you than most other people, and they are going to bring up stuff in you because they have that special relationship. So use that as much as you use the relationship with your parents to try and gain an insight into why you are the way that you are, what triggers you, what is your love language, what did you want more of, what did you need more of that you didn't get as children, and try and leave as much as you can the relationship with your grandparents as one that is neutral, no unspoken obligations either way. And remember that you are the most important person in your child's life. The way that you bring them up and you lay foundations for what is healthy, what is good, what is right, that's going to stick. That is going to stick whatever happens. So if anyone else comes along and does it differently, yeah, it can be really annoying, but it's not going to change your child forever.
Yeah, and I think for men, the question is how do you turn up when the in-laws are there? So can you be authentic? Can you put boundaries in place if they need to be put in place? And if you can't, if you're not acting authentically, if you find like you're triggered, then there's some work to do for you. And also the most common thing I see with my clients is that when the in-laws come round, the wife, the partner, gets triggered and gets completely dysregulated by the in-laws. So it's about recognizing that and helping protect the partner from that and helping support the partner when that happens. Because when the in-laws fly off, as they do, your partner's going to need some support. So being able to be there, understanding that dynamic and being there to support your partner when that happens.
Yeah, 100%. Well, hopefully that was helpful. Very complex relationship there, lots going on, but hopefully you've got some new insights into what might be triggering you and how to manage that.
If what we discussed was helpful, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. For more of the same, check out my social media, The Inner Child Healing Expert, or to work with me, go to laviniabrown.com.
You can find me on andrewlynn.net or Life Coach for Dads on Instagram. We work with both individuals and couples. If there are any topics you'd like us to cover, please reach out. Thanks for listening.